Well, yeah, you know me and his poetry, we still be on that weed'em shit. That birthing inspirational couplets and breed'em shit. That I spit cat should heed'em shit.
The Hidden Truth, the Malcolm Jamal Warner mystery. At 56 years old, Malcolm Jamal Warner wasn't just a veteran Hollywood actor. He was a symbol of black cultural resistance, a voice that echoed through decades of social and political change in the United States. But in June 2025, that voice was brutally silenced in the seemingly tranquil waters of Costa Rica. What began as a supposed accidental death revealed itself to be something far more sinister, a meticulously planned operation to eliminate a man who knew too much and was willing to tell everything. Ice Cube, at 56, the legendary rapper, actor, and symbol of hip-hop resistance, did what no one else dared to do. He broke Hollywood's code of silence and spoke openly about the mysterious death of Malcolm Jamal Warner. In his own words, "I have evidence they don't want you to see. Malcolm didn't die in an accident. He was murdered. And I'm going to expose every sordid detail of this conspiracy." To understand the magnitude of this revelation, we need to go back to the beginning of Malcolm's journey. Born in 1970 in Jersey City, New Jersey, he was named after Malcolm X, the iconic African-American civil rights activist. From childhood, Malcolm Warner demonstrated a maturity and insight that went far beyond his age. His eyes carried a depth that suggested an intuitive understanding of the racial and social complexities that defined 1970s and 1980s America. At just 14 years old, Malcolm was cast to play Theo Huxtable, the intelligent, rebellious, and charismatic son in the television series The Cosby Show. This wasn't just a TV show. It was a cultural phenomenon that redefined the representation of African Americans. In mainstream media, from 1984 to 1992, the series attracted over 30 million viewers per episode, becoming one of the most watched productions in American television history. Malcolm, at the center of this media hurricane, became one of America's most beloved and respected young actors, receiving 3 Emmy nominations and numerous other television awards. But what the American public didn't know was that even at the height of his fame, Malcolm had already begun questioning what was really happening behind the scenes of the entertainment industry. He wasn't just acting. He was observing, recording conversations, documenting behaviors, and keeping this information to himself. It was as if, unconsciously, he knew that one day he would need this evidence to protect himself or to expose the truth about the system that had made him famous. After The Cosby Show ended, Malcolm made a decision that surprised many in the industry. Unlike many of his colleagues, he didn't pursue fame at any cost. He rejected roles in major commercial productions that he considered stereotypical or degrading to the African American community. Instead, he dedicated himself to independent projects, documentaries, and lectures on mental health and black culture. In a rarely cited 2018 interview, Malcolm declared, "I don't need to be famous to be respected. I need to be true to be able to sleep at night." This change of direction led Malcolm down a path that few would dare to tread, a journey to discover and expose the truth behind his own career and the industry that had shaped him. He began writing, not to defend the past, but to expose a reality that had been carefully masked by decades of public relations and narrative control. Starting in 2022, Malcolm began secretly working with a small group of investigative journalists, civil rights lawyers, and technical collaborators specializing in digital security. Together, they were preparing 2 monumental projects that could revolutionize public understanding of Hollywood: an explosive autobiography and a documentary. Titled Hiding in Plain View, according to a close assistant, whose identity remains protected for security reasons, the autobiography manuscript was over 300 pages and contained internal documents, compromising emails, detailed testimonies, and deep analyses of how mainstream Media, especially Hollywood, had systematically manipulated the image and voice of black artists for decades. What made this work particularly dangerous was that Malcolm wasn't just criticizing the system in general terms. He was naming specific people, presenting concrete evidence, and building detailed cases against extremely powerful figures in the industry. At the top of Malcolm's list was none other than Bill Cosby, the man who had been like a television father to him during 8 crucial years of his formation. But according to Malcolm's notes, Cosby wasn't just a benevolent TV dad. He was an extremely influential figure who functioned simultaneously as a portal that led many black talents into Hollywood, and as a strict gatekeeper who ensured these talents remained exactly where the established system wanted them. In a note that circulated internally among close collaborators, Malcolm wrote, "Bill taught us how to speak to be accepted, how to dress so we wouldn't seem threatening, and how to live in a way that wouldn't bother anyone. But he never taught us how to resist. He never taught us that we had the right to question, to challenge, to demand more than the crumbs they offered us. No one knows exactly when, but apparently Bill Cosby discovered what Malcolm was doing. People close to Malcolm reported that by the end of 2023, he began being systematically excluded from professional opportunities. Film offers mysteriously disappeared, sponsors cancelled contracts without explanation, and some friends in the industry told him directly, "Someone doesn't want you to keep talking." But Malcolm didn't stop. With a voice recorder, an independent camera, and encrypted cloud storage accounts, he silently continued collecting every piece of the puzzle for his projects. In an unreleased episode of his personal podcast, he declared, "I'm not telling this story for revenge. I'm telling it because I don't want anyone else to remain silent like I did for so long." Malcolm's wife, whose identity has always been kept secret for security reasons, is apparently the only person with complete access to his project archives. According to a technical collaborator, Malcolm left 2 separate passwords, one for the autobiography, another for the documentary, and instructed, "If something happens to me, make sure my voice stays alive." That phrase, cold as a testament, has now become a guiding beacon for those left behind. Malcolm wasn't a hero in the traditional sense. He didn't organize crowds on stages, didn't make inflammatory speeches on national television. He simply wrote, recorded, and silently documented everything he saw with all his memory, patience, and uncompromising moral clarity. And that's exactly what made him so dangerous to the system. A man who knew too much, remembered with too much clarity, and adamantly refused to remain silent. Malcolm's final months were marked by a gradual but perceptible transformation in his behavior. No one can pinpoint the exact moment when Jamal Warner began to change, but those close to him began noticing worrying signs. The previously open and good-humored man, who was a constant presence at community events and always available for a conversation, now seemed to be living with a constant and indefinable fear. Malcolm had always been reserved in his personal life, but had never been distant or inaccessible. He continued participating in mental health seminars, kept his blog regularly updated, and conducted his personal podcast with admirable consistency. But then, in the final 3 months of his life, he abruptly cancelled all his public appearances. He stopped participating in live discussions, no longer responded to messages from industry colleagues, and those who managed to see him personally described something they had never seen in him before. Tense eyes, a forced smile, and a gaze that constantly shifted behind him, as if he was always checking if he was being followed. Initially, his wife thought he was just exhausted. Malcolm was a perfectionist by nature, and with all the projects he was developing, especially the independent documentary he had been silently filming since 2022, stress seemed understandable. But then, the strange behaviors didn't stop there. Malcolm abruptly changed the gym he had frequented for 5 years. He stopped using ride-hailing apps and started paying for private rides always in cash. His phone, previously full of notes, schedules, and work documents, was now used only for calls, never for text messages. A longtime friend, a television director who worked with Malcolm on a Netflix project, recalled, "The last time I saw him, I raised my phone to take a selfie, and he immediately lowered my hand. He said, 'Don't take a photo. I don't want to be registered anywhere.' I thought he was joking. But Malcolm wasn't joking. His wife, who had never appeared publicly in the media, confirmed after his death that he truly believed someone was watching him. She recounted how Malcolm frequently checked the cameras around his house, installed anti-surveillance software on his phone and computer, and even asked her not to go out alone at night. There were nights when he stayed awake all night, not because of insomnia, but because he didn't dare to sleep. In a handwritten diary found after Malcolm's death, one line repeated several times like an obsessive ritual: "If they come, leave my voice behind." As his fears deepened, Malcolm began withdrawing from the world he loved. He cancelled a lecture at Morehouse College at the last minute, declined an invitation to appear on CNN to discuss the iconic role of The Cosby Show. Wooden even suspended his personal podcast for almost 2 months, something that had never happened in 3 years of regular publishing. Then, just 4 days before Malcolm suddenly died in Costa Rica, a new podcast episode unexpectedly appeared. On his channel, the title was "When They Won't Let You Speak." No introduction, no background music, just Malcolm's voice, hoarse and slow, as if it was loaded with the weight of a buried past. For 27 minutes, he didn't name any specific person. He spoke only about the system, about the collapse of trust, and about the exhaustion of living up to others' expectations. One quote that was widely shared before the episode was taken down just 12 hours after being published was, "There comes a point when silence becomes more dangerous than speaking up. I've reached that point." Some listeners who managed to capture the episode before it disappeared said Malcolm's voice was loaded with implications. He spoke of a mentor who was now just a shadow, of handshakes in the dark, and of a world where you only exist if you play by the established rules. What's notable is that no one knows who removed the podcast. The channel remains active, previous episodes still work, but When They Won't Let You Speak disappeared from all distribution platforms. Malcolm posted nothing on social media after that. No explanation, no email responses, and then he disappeared. The trip to Costa Rica was initially presented as a private vacation. But according to a close source, Malcolm didn't bring any of his usual personal equipment. No camera, no laptop, no recording devices, just a few changes of clothes and a small notebook. That was the last time anyone saw Malcolm alive. On June 3rd, 2025, news spread. Malcolm Jamal Warner had drowned while swimming off the coast of Playa Grande, Costa Rica. His death was announced through a brief statement from local authorities. No photos of the scene, no identified witnesses, and most notably, no official investigation was opened. For a star beloved by millions of Americans during the 1980s and 1990s, the handling of his death was suspiciously quick and superficial. Malcolm's wife and mother were only informed after the body had already been transferred to the forensic center in San Jose. Less than 24 hours after the body was found, Malcolm was cremated without a public autopsy and without written consent from family members. His mother, Pamela Warner, stated in a brief interview with independent media, "We didn't sign anything. They said he wanted to be cremated, but no one in the family ever heard Malcolm say that." The speed of the cremation raised questions even among casual observers and forensic professionals. In cases of sudden death, especially involving a celebrity, standard procedure in most countries includes performing an autopsy, collecting DNA samples, obtaining third-party reports, and if disputes arise, allowing time for verification before burial or cremation. But in this case, every step was skipped at an unbelievable pace. When Malcolm's ashes were brought back to Los Angeles, what his family hoped for wasn't just a funeral, but what he had left behind. His personal laptop, phone, hard drives, notebooks, and especially the autobiography manuscript, a work Malcolm had spent over 2 years writing. But everything had disappeared. According to Malcolm's wife, the people responsible for handling his belongings in Costa Rica said they found no electronic devices in the hotel room where he was staying. The room was completely cleaned out. No camera, no laptop, no audio recorder. The very items Malcolm always carried according to a technician who had helped him edit videos. Even the phone, which Malcolm treated as an inseparable companion, was not among the returned belongings. And even more bizarre, his work email account was locked just 2 days after his death. When his wife tried to access it, she received a notice that the account had been disabled for security reasons by user request or legal representative. But Malcolm never appointed any legal representative to manage his digital assets. And no, not even his relatives, has been able to regain access since then. Additionally, backup copies of his projects stored in the cloud suddenly became unavailable. An insider, someone who had helped Malcolm with encryption and backups, confirmed, "We had at least 2 backup versions, each password protected, stored on military-grade encryption services. There's no reason both would disappear at the same time." He mentioned receiving an email from Malcolm just 2 days before he traveled to Costa Rica, stating he would send the final edited version within the week. That version was never sent, and what remains now is absolutely nothing. As news of his death spread, major media seemed to pretend they hadn't seen it. No investigative reports, no memorial programs on national television, no guests or colleagues invited to share stories about Malcolm. In major outlets like the New York Times, CNN, and Washington Post, the report of his death appeared only as a brief synopsis, almost buried among hundreds of other parallel stories. None of the original cast members of The Cosby Show spoke. Publicly, no condolences from directors who had worked with Malcolm, and notably, Bill Cosby remained completely silent. The man who worked alongside Malcolm for nearly a decade in the role of a television father posted no tribute, made no statements to the press, and didn't mention his death at all. That silence, according to Ice Cube, was louder than a statement. In a podcast recording, which was also later taken down, Ice Cube emphasized, "A man who once called someone his son, at the very least, should have posted a black and white photo with the words 'Rest in peace.' But he said nothing, not a word, not even a period. To me, that's a confession. Malcolm Jamal Warner never publicly accused anyone, but in silence, he recorded everything. A 300-page autobiography, hours of audio recordings, and a documentary project titled Hiding in Plain View. Everything prepared as an indictment aimed at the power structure behind Black Hollywood. And true to its title, what he revealed wasn't hidden. It was in plain sight. Malcolm's autobiography didn't just recount memories from The Cosby Show, but exposed the inner workings of the entertainment industry, image control, contract manipulation, and how black artists were forced to behave if they wanted to survive. According to an assistant who once worked with him, at first it was just about writing down the past. But the more Malcolm wrote, the more he realized he was uncovering a network. When everyone remained silent, Ice Cube didn't speak through a flashy press conference, not with a carefully crafted speech, but through a raw 9-minute video, poorly edited, uploaded on an independent platform where he looked directly at the camera and said, "I know what Malcolm told me. I know he was scared, and I know he didn't die naturally." Naturally, from that moment, Hollywood's long silence was broken. Ice Cube isn't just a rapper. He isn't just the founder of NWA, a group that helped define hip-hop as a force against systemic oppression. He's a man of truths who don't fall easily. And for years, Cube remained quiet, free from scandals, never chasing the spotlight unnecessarily. However, now he became the face of a new resistance movement, one carrying the ghost of an old friend, Malcolm Jamal Warner. Few knew that Cube and Malcolm shared a decades-long bond, silent, private, never publicly disclosed. But according to Cube, they often met in private conversations to discuss strategies on how to speak the truth without being erased from the industry. When Malcolm began writing his autobiography, Cube was among the first people he shared the manuscript with. He showed me a piece, not long, just a few pages, but I knew if he ever released the whole thing, someone would try to bury it, Cube said in a leaked backstage interview that never aired. Malcolm told Cube he felt watched, that his phone showed signs of surveillance, that emails he sent never reached their recipients. He spoke of a strange meeting with a famous director where there was no script, no production plan, just a soft suggestion. Maybe you should step back and let things sleep. Cube didn't see any of that as paranoia, especially not after Malcolm died and a wave of irregularities surfaced. The body cremated hastily, devices gone, accounts locked. But the breaking point came when Cube received a USB drive from an unnamed associate, someone who had helped Malcolm with cloud storage. That USB contained metadata logs, deleted emails, and login entries from unidentified IP addresses, all linked to Malcolm's cloud account within 48 hours of his death. According to Cube, there were at least 5 unauthorized access attempts on the files hiding in plain view final draft.mp4 and HJW Journal Part 3, both of which disappeared permanently from the cloud afterward. When Ice Cube released the first audio clip from the Rewrite Me If You Dare project, he didn't just ignite a debate, he opened a door that Hollywood had tried to keep shut for nearly a year. Until then, Malcolm Jamal Warner's death had been treated by the media as a tragic accident quickly swept into oblivion. But within 48 hours of the clip spreading across forums and independent platforms, the first signs of a silent awakening wave began to ripple. The first to speak up was Reggie Morgan, a documentary filmmaker who had worked with Malcolm in 2022. On a modestly followed YouTube channel, he recounted, "He told me something wasn't right. Malcolm believed he was being watched, not by fans or paparazzi, but by the very people who once signed his contracts." The video lasted just 12 minutes, yet racked up over 2 million views overnight. Soon after, a female screenwriter who had worked at the production company behind The Cosby Show shared on an independent podcast. "I wasn't surprised when I heard Cube speak. We used to have an internal email group, and one day Malcolm's name just disappeared from the list, no explanation, as if someone tried to erase him from the system." Even more striking was the pointed silence and response from those who once shared the spotlight with Malcolm. A veteran Emmy-winning actor unexpectedly tweeted just 3 words, "He was right." No context, no quote, but the post immediately went viral and was deleted within 3 hours. Still, thousands of screenshots had already spread, standing as proof that the story could no longer be buried. A series of independent news channels began retracing the timeline. Malcolm's abrupt withdrawal from film projects, the takedown of the When They Won't Let You Speak podcast episode, and Ice Cube's appearance at Malcolm's house just weeks before his death. What began as whispers now became a wave, and that wave was breaking toward the heart of an industry that once prided itself on being a beacon of light, but was now revealed to be harboring some of the darkest shadows. But the real explosion came when leaked documents began circulating on encrypted platforms, internal emails from studio executives discussing the Malcolm problem, contracts with silence clauses specifically targeting former Cosby Show cast members, and more damning still, financial records showing substantial payments to Reputation management companies in the months leading up to Malcolm's death. A former studio executive speaking on condition of anonymity, revealed in a distorted audio interview, Malcolm wasn't just paranoid. There were meetings, conversations about how to manage the situation before it got out of control. When someone has compromising information about figures as powerful as Bill Cosby, there are protocols, very specific protocols. The social media movement gained exponential momentum. Justice, for Malcolm, was no longer just a hashtag, it became a battle cry. Influential black artists began breaking their silence. Some shared their own experiences of being silenced or marginalized for challenging established power structures. Others revealed private conversations they had had with Malcolm in the months before his death, where he expressed genuine fear for his safety. Ava DuVernay, the acclaimed director, posted a cryptic but powerful message. Truth has a way of emerging, especially when buried by dirty hands. Spike Lee shared an old photo of himself with Malcolm with the caption, "Some brothers die twice, once when they stop breathing and again when their voice is silenced. We won't let that happen." But perhaps the most shocking development came from a completely unexpected source. Felicia Rashad, who played Malcolm's mother on The Cosby Show, dramatically broke her years of silence. In a series of Instagram posts that were quickly deleted but widely captured, she wrote, "I saw things, knew things, little Malcolm. He was too brave for his own good. Some people can't stand it when truth threatens their empires built on lies." Rashad's posts were accompanied by rare behind-the-scenes photos from The Cosby Show, including one particularly disturbing shot showing a young Malcolm clearly uncomfortable during what appeared to be an intense conversation with Bill Cosby. The body language was unmistakable. Cosby dominating the space, Malcolm recoiling, other cast members watching with tense expressions. Meanwhile, independent investigators began uncovering glaring inconsistencies in the official report of Malcolm's death. A former Costa Rican detective, speaking anonymously, revealed that the case had been fast-tracked through unconventional channels. "In my 20 years of career, I've never seen a celebrity drowning case closed so quickly. Normally there are protocols, investigations, at least a week of procedures. Here, everything was resolved in less than 24 hours. More disturbing still, hotel records showed that Malcolm had made several international calls in the hours before. His death? Calls to numbers that didn't correspond to any known contacts. One of these calls lasted more than 30 minutes and was made to a number registered in Washington, D.C., specifically to a law firm specializing in witness protection. Public pressure was becoming unbearable. Online petitions to reopen the investigation into Malcolm's death collected over 500,000 signatures in 1 week. Peaceful demonstrations were organized outside Hollywood studios, with signs showing Malcolm's young photo alongside his most recent image with the words, "Silenced, not forgotten." It was then that Ice Cube made his boldest move. During an unannounced live broadcast on multiple platforms simultaneously, he revealed what he called the final proof. It was an audio recording of nearly 5 minutes, allegedly from Malcolm's last phone conversation with a close friend, made just hours before his death. In the recording, which was authenticated by forensic audio experts, Malcolm's unmistakable voice can be heard saying, "If something happens to me tomorrow, you'll know it wasn't accidental. I have enough evidence to bring down entire empires, but I'm also certain they know that. I'm scared, man, really scared, but I can't stop now, not after everything I've discovered." His voice was clearly tense, occasionally trembling. At one point, he pauses and can be heard checking something, possibly looking out a window or checking doors. Then he continues, "If I can't release the documentary, if something happens to the manuscript, at least this conversation will be proof that I tried, that I didn't go quietly." The impact of this recording was seismic. Within hours, it was being played on international newscasts. legal experts began formally calling for the case to be reopened. The FBI announced it was evaluating whether there was federal jurisdiction to investigate the death. But the most revealing response came in the form of deafening silence from certain figures. Bill Cosby, who had remained publicly silent about Malcolm's death, continued his policy of no comment. His legal representatives issued only a brief and generic statement. Mr. Cosby has no knowledge of the events described and will not comment on unfounded speculation. However, sources close to Cosby's inner circle reported that emergency meetings were happening daily. One source described the atmosphere as controlled panic. Apparently, Cosby's legal team was working furiously to identify potential legal vulnerabilities related to Malcolm's unfinished project. Even more damaging were revelations that Cosby had hired a private investigation firm specializing in reputation crisis management, the same firm that had been contracted by other celebrities involved in high-profile scandals. Leaked financial records showed substantial payments to this firm, beginning exactly 3 months before Malcolm's death. Hollywood was beginning to crack under pressure. Studio executives who rarely made public comments began issuing statements distancing their companies from any involvement. Talent agents began quietly advising their clients to avoid any association with the growing controversy. But for every attempt to suppress the story, 2 new revelations emerged. Former Cosby Show employees began speaking out with disturbing stories about the work environment. Accounts of extremely strict non-disclosure agreements, unsolicited counseling sessions for cast members who asked too many questions, and an elaborate system of monitoring the personal activities of actors. A former production assistant, identified only as Sarah M., revealed in a radio interview, "There were files on everyone, not just professional information, but personal. Who they were dating, what their fears were, their vulnerabilities. Malcolm had a particularly thick file. Even at the time, that seemed strange for a teenager." Perhaps the most shocking aspect of these revelations was the extent of the operation. It wasn't just Bill Cosby operating alone, but an entire network of executives, producers, agents, and even journalists working to maintain a specific narrative and silence dissenting voices. A veteran entertainment journalist, speaking on condition of anonymity, admitted, "There were stories we never published, questions we never asked, not for lack of evidence, but because we knew which doors shouldn't be opened." The power of certain figures in the industry was absolute. Malcolm understood this too late. Meanwhile, Ice Cube continued his relentless campaign for truth. He announced he was forming a foundation dedicated to protecting artists who try to expose corruption in the entertainment industry. The Malcolm Warner Foundation would be independently funded and offer legal protection, security resources, and safe platforms for industry whistleblowers. "Malcolm died trying to tell his truth," Cube declared during the foundation's announcement. "We won't let his death be in vain. If they want war, they'll get war. But this time, they're not just fighting one person. They're fighting a movement." The war for truth about Malcolm Jamal Warner was just beginning, and with each new day, with each new revelation, it became clear that what had begun as one actor's death had transformed into something much larger, a decades-long reckoning with a system that had operated in the shadows for far too long. Malcolm's legacy wouldn't be the silence his killers intended. It would be the deafening roar of truth finally being set free. And in that roar, other voices began to join, creating a symphony of resistance that would echo through the corridors of Hollywood power for years to come. Malcolm Jamal Warner's story wasn't just about one man who knew too much. It was about a system that had failed to permanently silence a truth that refused to die. And now that truth was alive, growing, and spreading like wildfire through dry powder. Malcolm had written in his final diary, "Truth doesn't need permission to exist." And now, that truth was proving he was right.